next week's presentation is with Loretta Downs, who you might have seen at the coffee. Maybe you've heard her speak before. She's fantastic. Her topic is, old age ain't no place for sissies. The older I get, the more I see how right Betty Davis was when she said that living in a community of, when she said that, old age ain't no place for sissies. Living in a community of elder and aged individuals like me, we are constantly faced with the conditions that normal aging creates for ourselves and all the friends we make in Lakeside. How do we prepare ourselves for the changes we can expect and those we can't? Can we change our minds from fear and denial to acceptance, preparation, and even celebration? What are the skills we can master to adapt to the changes? How do we develop the capacity to be present for those we love as they experience aging and changing and dying before us? Loretta Downs is a gerontologist who has been working with aging and dying for over 35 years. She's an inspiring and uplifting speaker who is passionate about improving the end-of-life experience. She has published numerous articles, been quoted in articles and books, and interviewed for radio shows and podcasts. And Loretta gives advanced care planning workshops at LCS. I don't know, maybe some of you have taken them. And speaks wherever she's invited, and offers her services as a death doula. You want to ask her about that. This is her 11th Open Circle presentation, so please join us next week. I think her work is really important for all of us. And the talks are always different, so if you've seen her once, doesn't mean you've seen her. Well, it does mean you've seen her. You know what I mean. This week's presentations. Tales of an Accidental Expat, presented by Dale Hoyt Palfrey. On a balmy afternoon in March 1973, Dale and her spunky 83-year-old grandmother stepped down from a second-class bus for a weekend visit to Lake Chapala. Now, 50 years later, Dale is still here, and she is going to share the story of why she ended up as an accidental expat, observations on how the lakeside area has changed over time, and anecdotes about the people, historical events, and experiences that have enriched her life. Dale unexpectedly found her calling as a bilingual journalist within a few years of putting down roots on Lake Chapala shores. In addition to contributing articles on Mexican history and culture to mexconnect.com and various print publications, she has made a mark over a quarter of a century as Lakeside's veteran news correspondent for the Guadalajara Reporter. Please join me in welcoming our speaker today. Yay!
I don't know, testing. Testing. Audience, 1? 2? 1? Probably depends on how I hold it. Well, let me just start off by saying I didn't do the kind of preparation I would have normally done for this because damaged goods. I have some hairline fractures in my shoulder, my upper arm. I had a close encounter with the local cobblestones, and so I'm still here because they've what do you call it? The doctor has my arm bound up, but not my mouth. So I'm going to be a little more off the cuff than I would have been otherwise. But let me just say, in spite of this first big close encounter I've had with the local cobblestones, I'm still a really strong advocate for the cobblestone streets of Bakihik. I would never like to see them disappear. It's part of the essence of this village, and I know it has its inconveniences, believe me, but we need to keep Bakihik looking, the way it should be. So that's that. Okay. Now, so going back sort of to the title of this thing, how did I end up here? I came for a weekend. I did not come to spend the rest of my life in the Lake Chapala area. I came for a weekend with my grandmother, My grandparents had lived in Chapala in the early 1950s, when really there were just not very few foreigners, very many foreign residents. And when they lived in Chapala. Getting to Akihik at that stage of the game, it was easier by boat than by road. So there wasn't, so much interaction between the two pueblos back then. So anyway, after a few years here, they lived somewhere else in Mexico, up in the north part for a few years, and then went back to the States. And after my grandfather died, my grandmother got this bee in her bonnet that maybe she would like to come back to Mexico. I think she had a flame in Guanajuato. I thought she had a little romance going. This is in her 80s. So she went to Guanajuato. In the meantime, I had done some traveling in Mexico, and I was back in the States and talked to my dad on the phone, and she said, your grandmother's lost her mind. She's moving back to Mexico. And I went, well, good for her. So when I came back to Mexico a few months after she'd been here, I went to look her up in San Miguel. She wasn't doing very well. She was living basically on a diet of peanut butter and rum. And had some fainting spells into the arms of handsome young doctors. And in the meantime, so, I thought, okay, well, I'll help her get her back on her feet. And so I'll hang around for a few weeks or however long it takes. And a friend that she had met in San Miguel had packed up everything and decided to move to Chapala. The climate here, considerably better than San Miguel. And so my grandma said, I haven't been in Chapala for 25 years. Let's go. I'd like to see what it's like 25 years later. So we grabbed a bus from San Miguel. And before, when we got around Oakwood Lounge, she said, we don't need to go all the way to Guadalajara. It's sort of off the beaten track. We're getting off the bus at the crossroads. And it was like, okay, well, you know the ropes better than me, so I'm off the bus at what they call Santa Rosa, where the overpass is, where you connect with the Guadalajara highway. So we stood around there, we waited for a bus to come and stop, and there's some lady there, with a gunny sack at her feet that started grunting and moving around, and I'm going like, okay. So we get on this rickety old bus, and this is how I was introduced to Chapala. We went over that hill at Isloacan. Now in those days, most of the highway from the airport to Chapala, it was a 2-lane highway only. So it was a whole different thing. Anyway, we came over the top of the hill at Isloacan. It's just about 50 years ago today. I don't remember the exact date. It's that long ago. But there was this beautiful lake, and the jacarandas were in bloom as they are today. And you just go, wow, this is gorgeous. So anyway, we went to stay with her friend, and I had an old college pal who was in medical school in Guadalajara, so he said, well, I contacted him, and I said, we should get together. And he said, well, my classmates and I were going to go down to Chapala tomorrow to go horseback riding. And I said, oh, great, can I join you there? So while I was off on a horseback ride, my grandmother decided this is it for me. A friend of her friend had a house for rent down the block. And so she said, I'm moving here. Rented a house. And so, we went back to San Miguel and got all her stuff, came back here, and again, it was like, well, I'll just help her get settled in and then get on with my life. Well, my life got on right here. It was just one thing after another. Not too long after I got here, I was recruited to be in a play at the Lakeside Little Theater because they needed somebody for sort of an ingenue role. There weren't too many people available under 50 at that stage of the game. And then it just seemed to be one thing after another. There was always some other reason, to stay another week, to stay another month, to stay another year. And about a year and a half after we settled here, this new school opened here, Oak Hill School. It was the area's first bilingual school. And the young man who came to run the school ended up being my husband. We became close friends for a long time. We had sort of our separate sentimental lives. And after about 5 years, when I was about ready to go back to the States for reasons I won't get into, but I don't know, it was like love at first sight 5 years later, and we decided that, you know, we belonged together because we both spoke Spanish, we had similar experiences, and interests in common. He got into the theater as well, and in addition to running the school, I don't know, it just, we just fit. So anyway, that's really the reason that I'm here, is that I ended up making my life here with Hoyt Palfrey, the founder of Oak Hill School. This community is it's unique, and people come here for a lot of different reasons. I wanted to share with you something. Sorry about this. This is something that Neil James, who lived in this house right behind you for many, many years, most of her life, she wrote this. Many foreigners who come to Aihique are misfits elsewhere. And there is a tendency among them to lead unorthodox lives here. Neil James wrote that in 1946. That was 3 years before I was born. But that, for many years, really was the characteristic of the foreign community here. There were, you know, a bunch of oddballs, misfits, eccentric people from different parts of the world. And they came here for a lot of reasons. I mean, a lot of people came, I think in the generation of my grandmother when they first came, you know, it really had a lot to do with the economy. This is like after World War II, and people, you know, veterans. There were a lot of veterans who came to live here because they could live here at a very low cost. And of course, you know, it's the climate here. You can't beat it. In those days, the Lake Chapala Society already existed. And it would, when I came here, they had a tiny little hole-in-the-wall office down there on Avenida Madero, sort of across from the bus station in Chapala. And it was nothing like it is today. They had a little library, they had some services that they granted to the people, and it's amazing what has happened to LCS. Contrary to what some people believe, Neil James was not a founder of the Lake Chapala Society, but she ended up being the philanthropist or the benefactor that made it possible for us to all be here today in what was once her home. And it's wonderful to see that her home has been preserved, more or less intact, and that LCS has grown to do all the wonderful things it does for the community today. So thank you for all of you who supported either as members or as donors today. The services here are fabulous. This is the place to go if you're new in town. In the old days, I don't know how in the era of my grandmother, and I kick myself in the rear repeatedly for not pumping her for more information when she was around. And by the way, as it says in the introduction, you know, 50 years later, I'm still here. She's still here too, but she's 6 feet under the Chapala Cemetery. So we visit her, you know, every year on the Day of the Dead, and she's a big part of our heritage. Anyway, so how do people end up getting here? Mexico has been promoted for I don't know how long, but in the old days, it was a lot of self-published books. Here's one from 1968. It's called Invest and Retire in Mexico. So this is not a new phenomenon here. This has been going on for a long time. Here's some more. Wait a minute. I have quite a collection of books. I'm a bookophile. The Greatest Escape, How to Live in Paradise for $250 per month, printed in 1982. A little bit obsolete. This is a guy named Tom McLaughlin, who came here sort of on a whim and ended up being, I think, sort of a real estate guy because he seemed to, you know, this is sort of a personal account of how he found this place, how he found this place, how they bought property, and a lot of advice, which again is completely obsolete because nobody is going to find a place to live, much less live on an income of $250 per month. Now the caveat to that was per person, but $500 a month, anybody here live on $500 a month these days? No, I didn't think so. Now this one I lost the cover to. This is called Paradise Found. How to live in North America's best climate for under $300 a month. That was in 1986. The second edition, the title was changed to under $500 a month. Choose Mexico, 1985. This is like $700. Anybody know what the going amount is, the minimum you need to be a resident here? I'm not sure what it is, but I think it's like $2,500 more or less now. Anybody know? Some people can still do that. Anyway, so how has this area changed in those 50 years that I've lived here? Well, in a lot of ways, better, and a lot of ways, not so much better. The one thing that I've been able to watch over 50 years is the evolution of Lake Chapala itself. When I first came here in 1973, Chapala was in sort of a cycle of abundance. There was tons of water in the lake. In the rainy season, down by the old train station, you couldn't get by there because the water came all the way up to that part. You know, there were times when I got to the steps of the church in Chapala. And at that time, this is before climate change was a factor, you could just pretty much, the rainy season was absolutely like clockwork. You'll see a lot of people say, oh, it rains at night and it's not in the daytime. Well, that's not exactly true anymore. But when I first came here, it was like clockwork. In the afternoon, you see the clouds build up on the south side of the lake, and then they move across the lake, and about 9 o'clock, the heavens would open and would rain all night long. And then clear up in the morning, and beautiful sunshine, clear days, clear skies. And that was one of the reasons that the lake was, you know, in so much water at that stage, one of the high points. And then, of course, we went through a period of drought, and man's interference, because they started using a lot of the water from the whole Lerma system for agriculture up in Guanajuato. So the combination of that and the building of dams and a cycle of drought, the lake got really, 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 really low around the 1995, 2000 period, to the point where if you wanted to go for a boat ride from Chapala, you had to get a ride about 1 kilometer out to the lake. They had some guys rigged up a pickup truck and an old boat. They pieced them together. And so it looked like you were in a boat, but you were really in a pickup truck, and that was your ride out to where the lake was. But it was kind of distressing to see the lake just, shriveling up, and you're going like, what's going to happen? Doom and gloom, and the lake's finished. And then, Mother Nature did a fast one. Well, let me just throw this in. I remember one year around that time. Every year they bring, those of you who know how things operate here, every year they bring out the Virgin of Zapopan to visit Chapala. She's considered the queen of the lake. She's been officially named that a few years back. But even before that, they would bring her out because they said in the 50s, when the lake was absolutely at its lowest point of all time, the bishop in Guadalajara, the Archbishop of Guadalajara said, if you pray to the Virgin and the lake comes back up, I will bring her out to Chapala as a reward. Well, I don't know how hard people prayed, but again, it was one of these miracle things where one summer it rained so much that the lake came all the way back up to the pier where it hadn't been for a number of years. So she was, considered the savior of the lake, and there's a plaque outside the church in Chapala that acknowledges that. So anyway, they bring her out every summer, and when the lake was really low, I remember going, I think at that time I was working for the newspaper, and I thought, okay, well I gotta go, do a report on the visit of the Virgin. And it was like I walked out to Malecon, and the beach was huge at that point, and it was full of people. It was like, whoa, this is like the Catholic Woodstock here. I mean, it was amazing the number of people, and well, you know, again, I don't know, something happened. They used to say there were two set ways to say Lake Chapala. One was the miracle solution, and the other was the practical solution. The miracle solution would be if the government saved the lake. And the practical solution would be if all the Catholics prayed. A miracle of the Virgin. But anyway, the most astounding, somewhere around that time, I thought as part of my work, I would start to record how the lake evolved through the rainy season. Because every year, you say, oh, it's never been so low. Oh, it's never rained so little, you know, all these opinions. And I thought, you know, I need to make a visual record. So I picked out about 4 or 5 different points where I would go and take photographs. And I started in January of 2003. And I would go to the Chapala Pier. I still do this. Go to the pier in Chapala. Points here in Akihik, about 5 or 6 different points, and just try and get the same angle of the lake and see how it changed month after month. Well, we had another one of those phenomenal rainy seasons, added to whatever efforts the government had made to try and let more water release from the Lerma. And all of a sudden, the lake just started coming up. I mean, it was the thing where I went from, I can't do this once a month. I had to do this at least once a week from August through October. And it was absolutely phenomenal how fast it came up. But part of the reason, it depends on where you are. But it was very dramatic in Chapala because it's very shallow. The lake is very shallow there, so it filled up really quickly, whereas other parts like on Mescala where the water's deeper, you don't notice the distance between the shoreline and the mountains. It's a different shape of the lake. But that was just it was just the most exciting thing for the people here to see the lake suddenly recover that way. And I mean, people were going out and hanging out on the beach and jumping for joy and swimming and doing all this wonderful stuff because it was so exciting. So of course after that the Virgin was credited with her second miracle for Lake Chapala. And it was after that they named her the Queen of the Lake, one of dozens of titles she has. So it's very exciting. If you've never been to the reception, she always comes in I think it's the first Sunday in July, second Sunday in July. That she comes out here and they make quite a big deal, and they have all the Indian dancers and motorcycle squads and bicycle people, and it's phenomenal. I mean, it's a real showstopper, and it's an emotional thing, you know, for the people, and you kind of see why people have such devotion. When they parade the Virgin around, she's in a little glass case when they take her off the float. And the people just, they have to touch her. They can't physically touch the actual figure, but, the faith that they have in this figure is absolutely phenomenal. And that's usually on the Sunday, and then the really cool thing is the day after, because she spends the night in Chapala. And usually, if the weather permits, they'll take her out for a spin on the lake. In the boat, they go out to the Alacran, the Isla Alacran is the Alacran island, there's a little chapel out there. And that's for local people. The boatsmen don't charge, everybody gets a free ride out there. And it's 10, 20, 30 different boats just filled with people, and they follow the Virgin. She gets, front and center in one of the boats. And everybody goes out there and they sing, and the musicians are playing, and those of us who are fortunate to work for the press, we get a special boat because they drive around so we can get different angles. And then when we get on the island, they take her out to the chapel, and there's a celebration of the Mass, and again, the prayers of all the faithful. And then the fishermen throw a lunch, free lunch for everybody, fish dinner, fried fish. For 500 people, it's a really neat experience. Anyway, so the lake. People have a lot of different ideas about the lake. You'll see it if you follow people on the internet, and somebody says, well, what's the condition of the lake? And I've heard that it's really polluted, and you'll get as many opinions as there are comments on there about how bad it is. The lake is not as good as it could be, but not as bad as it has been. We're at a very decent level right now because the government has made some steps to make sure that it gets enough water. And the toxicity of the water is obviously worse when the water level is lower because it's more concentrated. Heavy metals in the lake? Yep, they're there all right, but they're mostly sink to the bottom because they're heavy metals. They go down. Can you eat the fish in the lake? A lot of people eat the fish in the lake. I wouldn't do it on a regular basis, but you know, I've eaten my share of fish from the lake, and I don't glow in the dark yet. So I think it's you know, in moderation, probably not too bad. All the heavy metals tend to concentrate in the viscera, and since we don't eat that part of the fish, not that big a problem. I don't want to get into the whole thing about kidney disease because that's way too complicated. But that is an issue, but it's not necessarily attributed to eating fish from the lake or even consuming water. There's many, many factors that create that particular situation. Anyway, the government has done some good things, and I think they've been lax on other things. We have a current problem of people trying to take over what's called the federal zone. And under Mexican law, the beach should be open for passage, so there's a lot of violations out there, and the government is very lax about enforcing their own regulations in that respect, and we don't know how much of that is corruption or just ineptitude. And people for many years blamed Guanajuato and all the farmers and the industry for the pollution in the lake, but actually I believe at this point it's as much factors of what they call the cuenca propia, which is the actual basin of the lake. Because of so much use of chemicals in farming, it gets washed into the lake. So that's a considerable source of pollution for the lake. But it's not toxic. Somebody just posted on Facebook the other day, it's like, I'm thinking about bringing my dogs, can I swim in the lake? And you know, again, it was like, hell yes, and hell no. So, I guess you have to just make your own call on that. My dogs have gone swimming in the lake. We bathe them when they get done, and I have some very ancient dogs. So, how old is Ginger? 12? I have a 12-year-old dog who's a golden retriever. Believe me, she loves to swim in the lake. She probably can't do it anymore, but we haven't been down for a while. So again, if you take good care of the animals, you know, would I swim in the lake? No. But it's more because the silt in the lake, there was a lot of trash out there, from dead fishing nets to old fences when the lake was really low and people fenced off for farming. So there's certain dangers to the lake. Boating in the lake. One thing, we've lost a few foreigners to accidents in the lake because they really, you know, it looks like, oh, it's not a very deep lake, you know, it's not really dangerous. Lake Chapala has a number of different winds, as they call them, the vientos that come from different directions. And boy, you can get caught in one of those late afternoon winds in a sudden gust, and that's what happened. We had, I think, 3 Canadians who drowned a few years ago. They got a little tanked up and got in a boat, didn't know what they were doing, and they had a tragic accident. So it's safe if you go with boatsmen who actually know and understand the issues, and that's why, for example, when they take the Virgin out, if the weather isn't suitable, they won't go because they know that understand the dangers of the lake. Boy, okay, I'm running out of time, so let's see. Okay, one of the things that people complain about the most is the traffic. And this is a situation which is not going to be easy to fix. So we just have to be patient, use our cars as little as possible. and contribute to what we can. The governor has promised he's going to look into it. I don't see any solution except building up, a waterfront balcony. That's my solution. But that ain't going to happen in my lifetime because it's going to cost a fortune. Anybody who's ever been to Mazatlan, Manzanillo, Veracruz, they have beautiful balcones that have, traffic and all that. But I just don't see that happening here. So hopefully someday we'll have better public transportation. And, when you can, park your car, walk, watch out for the cobblestones, and enjoy this. As I said, I'm a big advocate for keeping our cobblestones so that we don't lose our essence. Okay. Who's a gringo? Anybody here identify themselves as a gringo? I know that a lot of Canadians don't like to be called gringos because they think you have to be a U.S. citizen. If you're a Mexicano and you see an Anglo-looking person, one who doesn't speak the language, doesn't matter where they come from, they're gringos. And the term gringo, it depends on the context and the tone that you use the word, whether it's offensive or not. And you should be able to know the difference. But I think, I don't think we should be upset by calling ourselves gringos or having other people call us unless they do it in a mean way. And if they do it in a mean way, you might deserve it, depending on your behavior. Because we have a lot of new people here who, are not always respectful and kind to the Mexican culture. And it's the ugly American phenomenon. And so if you get called, then maybe because you asked for it. There's a debate that goes on also on Facebook about, and I am a permanent resident. I, pay my taxes. I own property here. I am not a guest in this country. I'm sorry, you are a guest. If you are a foreigner and you are not a Mexican and you have not taken up Mexican citizenship, as far as I'm concerned, we are all guests here by the good graces of the Mexican authorities. We're here, and we should behave as if we are guests, whether we call ourselves guests or not. One of the things I want to talk about is one of the things I've seen change over the years is bureaucracy. A lot of people get frustrated by Mexican bureaucracy. Believe me, it's a piece of cake now compared to what it was when I came here. When my husband and I first had our visitor permits, working permits, first of all, you had to do all your business in Guadalajara, and then everything went to Mexico City. And we were required to renew our permits, our whatever work permits, every 6 months. It took about 6 months for that process to happen. I remember going to Guadalajara one time to start the renewal, and they said, "Oh, your books just came back from Mexico City." And my husband said, "Could I touch it? Could I hold it? Because it's like, I never seem to have the darn thing." Now, of course, we have an office right here in Chapala. They're very efficient. There's lots of facilitators, if you can't handle it, you prefer not to, who will help you out if you need it. And you get your little card, and you're home free. So it's a whole different. We used to have these little books that we had to get stamped, and then they made a mistake. They had to take it apart and fix it. I mean, it was a big hassle. Paying your car tax. We're all in the point that if you have a Mexican car, you got to renew your registration. Well, back when I first had my Mexican car here, it was upstairs in what used to be the post office, which doesn't even exist anymore in Chapala. And it was a tiny little room, and all these people were crowded in there, and there was this weird window with a little place where you could talk down at the bottom, so you'd have to stand like this to talk to the lady behind the glass, and it would take you about 6 hours to renew your thing. Now we can do it online. Things have gotten a lot easier. The Mexican bureaucracy, and any bureaucracy, I mean, tell me it's not bad in the States as well. Canada. So you just, it's one of those things you have to adapt to, accept. It's just part of the price for living in paradise. And telephones. People put on Facebook, oh my God, my internet's been down for like 30 minutes! It's an absolute panic. This is what we had before we had the internet, okay? These self-published books with now information, obviously. We are so fortunate now that there is the internet, that there are ways that people get information. That's how people discover this area now, and how they answer their gazillion questions about how to get by here. And again, probably most of you have already been through the initial learning curve. But if you find anybody who's new, my first recommendation is don't depend on internet, don't depend on Facebook, depend on the Lake Chapala Society, because they have a program that I think is once a month, and it's your first introduction to Lakeside, and it's full of valuable information. So I would highly recommend that you depend on LCS for one of its best services. Oh geez, I could go on for hours. I want to mention two other books. This is a bit obsolete now, in a way, but not so much. Living at Lake Chapala. I don't know if it's really readily available now. This is my colleague Judy King. But she really knows this area, and this is a wonderful book because it's, living at Lake Chapala, a lot of, practical advice, some of which may be a bit outdated. But she tells anecdotes about, about living here and adjusting to life here, which are beautifully written and quite entertaining. And one of my favorite ones is called Party in a Box. It's toward the end of the book. And she writes about how her housekeeper wanted to use her house for a birthday party for a member of the family, for a kid in the family. And she's in an absolute tailspin, because you don't seem to be planning the party a month in advance, right? And they keep telling her, don't worry, senora, everything will be fine. And sure enough, like, an hour and a half before the party's going to start, 20 people show up, they throw it all together, party comes out just fine, no problem. This is adjusting to Mexico time. And boy, Jesus, I don't want to talk about that too. Anyway, I recommend Judy's book. If it's not available at the local stores, I'm sure they have a copy here in the library. And if you really want to know the evolution of this community, you gotta read this book. This is Foreign Footprints and Decades of Change in a Mexican Village, Tony Burton. Read everything Tony Burton has written. Every single one of his books is just chock full of very valuable, fascinating, well-researched, well-documented information. He's my personal hero because he has gotten rid of a lot of the myths. Although they still go around. This is the world's second best climate in the world by National Geographic. That's total bull. Never happened. The climate here is great. It may be the best in the world, or the second best in the world, or the third, or the fifth, or who knows, who cares? It's beautiful here. But National Geographic never said anything about the climate here. Tony is a myth buster, and probably the most knowledgeable historian about this area, more than any Mexicano ever. So anything you can get your hands on, buy his book. He's got a really cool book, which he tells me sales have been great. It's postcard history of Lake Chapala, and it's full of these wonderful images of Lake Chapala through the ages, from the time photography started, really. So I would recommend that. Okay, so I think I've used up my time. So, okay, I'm going to talk about Mexico time. In the 80s, people that lived here started wearing the gringos, started wearing these t-shirts and proudly said, I'm on Mexico time. Which means that they had taken to the sort of laid-back pace of living here, and that was wonderful. Mexico time, we all know that, mañana, the literal translation of mañana is not today. Right? It could be tomorrow, or tomorrow after that, and tomorrow after that, and tomorrow after that. The other term is ahorita. Okay? Ahora means now. Ahorita means more or less now, which could be anywhere between 5 minutes and maybe 5 years. So, and I discovered through time that there are different nuances of Mexico time. Because Mexico time is like the way we kind of live here, kind of like, don't be in a hurry. Well, it won't help anyway. And then I discovered when my daughter was a kid, I sent her off to Chago camp because she was a horseback rider. And that's when I discovered Mexico country time, which is even more laid back. We had a thing where the parents would go down while she was in camp every weekend, and they would go on a little adventure. So we're supposed to go swimming one day, and everybody went out to get in the cars and go off to the balneario where the swimming thing was going to happen. And somebody had a flat, so we had to wait for that. And then, you know, piling everybody in. It's just like more relaxed than Mexico time. Then there's Mexico political time, which is, you know, the boss, whatever the politicians decide when something happens. Mexico indigenous time. Okay, the indigenous people, they don't use calendars or wristwatches. They have a different whole sense of time. And I realized that at some big meeting they had at the Monte Carlo years ago about the lake. And there were government muckety-mucks, and there were experts from the University of Guadalajara, and all these guys in suits with all this information. And we're all sitting around, and they had the formalities of the opening ceremony, which is just boring as can be, but there's sort of, you have to do it. But there happened to be a Huichol shaman there as one of the honored guests. And all of a sudden, in the middle of all these speeches, this gentleman gets up in his costume, and he's got a thing of water, and he's got a flower, and he starts walking around in the crowd and sort of blessing us with water. And I realized, you know, this is Mexico indigenous time. You don't depend on a clock or a calendar. When the universe moves you, you do what you're going to do. So, like, you know, every once in a while you say, oh, they're going to come and do one of their ceremonies out on the island, because there's a beautiful little shrine out there on the Balacan Island, because it's one of the sacred points. And they say, okay, they'll be here Thursday at 11. I get this kind of a notice, you know, for the newspaper. Or they're going to be here at 11. Well, maybe they'll come. Maybe it'll be a day or two later. Maybe it'll be a week or two later. Again, you know, they are moved by things that we don't even sense, I think, of the universe. And anyway, so just, you know, let Mexico time guide you, and don't worry so much about your wristwatch. I noticed that the foreigners, like, you know, they want to get to some event and be the first ones there and get the front row seats to the best parking place. Relax, you know, it'll all happen. People ask sometimes, okay, well, what time does the parade start? What time does the fiesta start? When they're ready. When it starts. You can just relax and go with the flow. You'll be a lot happier and not so uptight. Okay, so Mexico time. Anybody have any questions that they think I might actually be able to answer?
Questions? I'll come around. Okay, I'm going to start over here. If you want to stand up for me, please.
Dale, thank you for your talk and bringing out the point of us being guests here. I've heard you put a sharper point on it and call us invaders, which may be more true to the reality. But I wonder if you could talk about the issue of expat.
Expat activism and the role that those of us who are here living permanently, how that's changed over the last 10 years.
So I wonder if you could talk for a moment about how expat activism has changed over the last 50 years and what people who are living here were involved in back then as opposed to the issues that we're involved in now? And what is our role being active in this community?
Okay, there's a lot of people that worry about getting involved in anything that vaguely smacks of being political. I wouldn't worry about it. I've never seen anybody deported from this community for any kind of activism. The foreigners who've been deported from this country usually get involved in very hairy political issues. That's happened like in Chiapas and a lot of Europe, and a few Europeans. So I wouldn't hesitate if you feel, I'm passionate about something and want to make a statement or participate in a march or a protest. But there are times when I feel like, butt out. For example, on the whole issue of, I don't know, things like traffic and whatnot. It's not our call. Oh, I know. Here's the one. Fireworks, the cohetes. Okay? Gringos hate cohetes, most of them. And, every time there's anything, well, what are you doing? You're just going to have to get used to it. It's just what I call part of the auditory landscape. And if you get neurotic about it, it's worse. And if you get neurotic about your dogs and cats, it's worse for them. So I'm not saying they're going to be there forever, but this is a festive country, and the more gringos complain about cohetes, the more cohetes they shoot off intentionally. I'm pretty convinced of that. So you have to figure out how to adapt to that and accept that as part of the culture. I don't think it's our decision. There may come a time when enough of the local people will say we don't want the noise pollution, it hurts the animals, but it's not our call. So, but if it makes you feel better to complain on Facebook, go for it. Yeah? Is it on? No? Yes? Okay. But anyway, don't sweat up and say, if it makes you feel better, go ahead and complain, but it won't make any difference whatsoever.
Hi, Dale.
Hi.
You must know this answer to this intriguing story I heard. I heard there's little tiny pitchers that people have thrown into the lake, and I saw one around the guy's neck, and he told me a convoluted story about them. Do you know about this?
The little clay pots?
Yes.
Yes, there's lots of information about that. It goes back to the pre-Hispanic era, as far as anybody knows. That was part of the rituals that they used to pay tribute to the lake goddess, Michawali. And there have been tons of them found. There are probably not too many left anymore, and they're never found until the lake goes down. Something I was reading not too long ago is like where they found the biggest deposits are down in the area of Pocopec. Anyway, you can find some samples of that at the old train station. They have a little archaeological museum. Yeah, the old train station now called the Centro Cultural González Gallo. Most of them were little pots, and they supposedly would deposit tears or blood. They would pierce the ears and take drops of blood as a kind of sacrifice to the lake goddess, so that the lake would. We get a beneficial rainy season, not too many of these storms, the culebras, the water spouts. So that's what that's about. You can see something about it on the mural that's on the side of the Delegación office here in Ajijic. There's a mural by Javier Zaragoza that explains a little about one of the festivities where they did that.
Hi, thanks so much for your presentation. My only frustration about living here is language, because I'm so old, and I try, and I can't remember anything I learned this morning. I wondered if you would talk a little bit about any suggestions you might have, or experiences, or just language in general for so many of us who are just not able to speak Spanish.
Yeah, that was on my list of topics, is the language barrier. I know I was very fortunate in that I had some genetic factors in my favor and schooling in my favor, and I got here when I was in my 20s, so it wasn't impossible for me to learn the language. I spent 6 months in Mexico City where full immersion, nobody spoke English, and I kind of was supposed to learn. For older people, it's extremely difficult for most older people to pick up the language. So you just have to do the best that you can. It's extremely, I know we're very fortunate that so many people in this community speak English and are willing to do that. I just had my encounter with my doctor, and we had a funny dialogue between my daughter and my granddaughter and myself, because we were speaking Spanish and he was speaking English. So a lot of Mexicans want to practice their English, and they're extremely courteous and tolerant of the way we butcher their language. They're probably more tolerant than I am, because I get fed up with the way we spell libramiento and they haven't got a clue. But just be kind to yourself and do your best, and any effort you make is greatly appreciated. It's hard for me to explain because, I was able to pick up the language as a younger person, and then through experiences, learn not only just the spoken language, but the written language, the reading. But I still learn new words. Every week I learn at least one new word. And it's like, what? And I have to ask my daughter, well, what is that? What I do when I learn a new word is I take a little Post-it, write the word down if I need a reminder of what the translation is, and I stick it up in the bathroom mirror so that I'm looking at it every single day. And you'll be surprised when you learn a new word that all of a sudden you'll start hearing that word over and over and over again. Toalla means towel. And you build up your vocabulary little by little. But please try. Please try, and please learn the basics. You want to make sure that you can communicate if you have an emergency, your name, your address, how to contact you. That's extremely important for us older folks. And the other thing is your manners. When you go to the store or you go to interact with somebody, don't just blurt out what you want, like some old guy at the counter at the supermarket years ago. Ocho tocino! And the butcher's like, Ocho tocino. He wants bacon, he wants 8, but 8 what? 8 pesos, 800 grams, 8 slices? Not. So don't just blurt it out. Start out with the polite thing is, buenos dias, buenas tardes, ¿cómo está? Su mamá, ¿cómo está? That politeness is a huge factor in this culture. And we tend to be very direct, everything is abbreviated in English. We cut to the chase. But in Spanish, take your time and be kind and say, por favor, gracias. That basic courtesy language is really essential so that you are welcome in this community and anywhere in this country. Does that help? Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to Google Translate. Dale, that was a great talk, very enjoyable.
Thank you.
I traveled some of the villages east of Mexcala, San Pedro, Chapicote, La Zapatera. And when you talk with the old farmers, the fishermen, about the quality of the water in the lake, the same thing keeps coming up very often, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Do you have any take on that at all? About what that's done to the Lerma River and the lake itself?
Well, theoretically there should be greater supervision, but I don't think that's a reality. I guess modernization in farming, I don't know that that's directly related to NAFTA, but obviously the use of chemical products in agriculture has had a huge impact on this lake. Obviously industry, upriver. But I think NAFTA has had more of an impact on this community because that's when things started to really change. It's all pretty much the same. A lot of interaction between the Mexicanos and the gringos here until NAFTA. And when we got NAFTA, then all of a sudden you didn't have to say, oh, you're going to the border, bring me a Snickers. Now we can, we've got the internet, we got telephone service, we've got internet, and it's part of what has changed this community. And people can now live here, but in a bubble, in a gringo bubble, where they're not really living in Mexico. They want to have the low cost of living, and they have the, the comfort of the creature comforts they're used to. Whereas before, people, the eccentrics that came here, as Teal J mentioned, you actually had to want to live in Mexico. You wanted to have the Mexico experience. So to me, that's had more of an impact than it has in terms of the water quality of the lake. It is a big problem, but I don't know what the solution is. I know that there's efforts to get more organic farming going on, so that people are using less natural things. I think there's also a big issue with pollution with all the berry fields out in the Holco area, where they're I don't know for a fact how big an impact it is, but I'm sure there's there is an impact, and there's a huge impact on the whole farming community. I mean, I'm kind of distressed to see the farmland disappearing in this community and being turned into little condo units. It kind of breaks my heart, but anyway, it is what it is.
Yeah. Thank you so much.